Hi everybody. Well, we're back on the SaaS stage. Hope you're having a nice time at TechCrunch Disrupt. We've had some fantastic discussions here today, and we're going to kick off this next section on artificial intelligence. But remember also, later on you'll be hearing about quantum computing and SaaS, and you'll be hearing from Atlassian as well. But without further ado, artificial intelligence for SaaS, it's a big topic, and AI is clearly going to revolutionize the SaaS sector. And in this session, we're going to hear from Ines Chami from NumberStation AI, David Desanto from GitLab, Navarina Singh from Credo AI, and they're going to talk about how best to apply AI in SaaS. And to lead the discussion is the fantabulous British journalist, Paul Sawyers, my fellow compatriot, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you, Paul. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you for coming here today. So we're talking about generative AI today. So it's unquestionably one of the biggest buzzwords of the past year. We've all seen the songs written in the style of Bob Dylan, created in seconds by simple keywords punched into search engines. But at the same time, businesses are trying to figure out how they can benefit from this. And investors are falling over themselves to back the next big thing. But as one skeptical VC said, if ChatGPT is the iPhone, we're currently seeing a lot of calculator apps. So there's a lot of hype, and the FOMO is palpable. I want to know what the reality is. So, Ines, how is Gen AI being used in the software and enterprise sphere today?
So these models, as probably everyone knows today, are generative models. They generate content, whether it's images, videos, text. A lot of the applications fall in the text-to-text bucket, so we've seen them used for writing assistance, so like helping write emails or marketing content, coding assistance, so generating code and helping like have documentation, etc. Summarization, search as well, like revisiting how search is done from a retrieval-based to a more conversational approach to search. And there's also, in the enterprise specifically, a lot of applications more in the structured data world. These models can be used to clean data, for instance. So we had some research on that at Stanford, like removing duplicates or normalizing entries in data. That's one area of application. Analytics as well, of generating visualization, generating dashboards, etc.
So kind of assisting humans in their day-to-day work. Okay.
Exactly.
David, you're already using generative AI at GitLab. Can you maybe run through some of the things you're currently using it for?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those who are not familiar with GitLab, we're an enterprise DevSecOps platform helping companies deliver software securely and fast. And so for our customers, their need is, how do I do more with less without compromising? And so we started using generative AI in 2021 to help teams get through code review more efficiently. And what we learned from that was, not only was that a bottleneck, but we can make them 2, 3, 4 times better at getting through it. And from there, we decided, what else could we do? We support the entire software development lifecycle. And so we looked at code completion, and we launched that late last year, as well as helping people get through planning more efficiently, whether that's understanding the context of what they're supposed to be working on, helping them secure their software with remediating vulnerabilities, leveraging AI, and essentially helping everyone who's involved just be more effective. To kind of build off what Ines just said, really the goal with AI is to help them be better at what they do. And by applying AI successfully across the entire software development lifecycle, you can help everyone be more effective.
So it's not going to replace developers anytime soon?
No, I think the biggest scare is that people think it's the AI in movies, that tomorrow there's going to be an uprising of AI and we're all not going to have jobs. But today it is there to really boost your efficiency.
Okay. And Navarina, I know you've been working in Gen AI for a while as well, but a lot has happened in the last sort of 9 to 12 months. So it must be quite exciting for you just to see this all of a sudden get really into the public conversation. So what is the main difference today compared to say 12 months ago in terms of Gen AI in the industry?
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me. A little bit about Credo AI, because we are arriving at Gen AI from a slightly different angle. So Credo AI is an AI governance SaaS platform. We provide continuous oversight and accountability across your entire AI lifecycle, as well as your processes, with the key goal of obviously introducing transparency, but also doing active risk management. So as you can imagine, David, for us, it wasn't just the excitement of Gen AI, but how can we break generative AI and figure out what the risk within these systems are. So I would say that for us, the past 12 months have been very interesting, because we can literally have like a pre-ChatGPT era and then a post-ChatGPT era. And the core thing that we are seeing is pre-ChatGPT, most of our customers, which are primarily Global 2000s and mid-sized companies in insurance, financial services, healthcare, and government, they were using traditional machine learning, linear regression, CNNs, RNNs, for very high net worth AI applications, everything from risk scoring to claim processing to computer vision, facial recognition systems. And I would say that post-ChatGPT, what has happened is those high net worth assets are still based on traditional ML, but we are seeing emergence of brand new applications, and those applications being made available to non-data scientists within an organization. So everything that Ines said previously is, I would say, very true, because we are finding emergence of new personas within an enterprise. A marketer, a financial service person, a financial person, or someone in policy using ChatGPT-like tools for marketing, copy, data summarization, customer support. And so I would say that pre-ChatGPT and post-ChatGPT, one, democratization of AI has truly happened. Second, risk surface area drastically increased. And third is, I think there's a bigger focus on how do you put guardrails in place for these very powerful technologies to get the business outcomes, because it's not just about winning in AI anymore, it's about how you win in AI.
So large language models are obviously at the heart of all this, and ChatGPT has probably made everyone understand what, or at least they've heard the term LLM now. But there's a big debate at the moment about whether to use an off-the-shelf one from a company like Google or OpenAI, or to use open source one, fine-tune it, train it yourself in-house. Could you maybe go through some of the concerns you're hearing from customers about using large language models from a company such as OpenAI? Navarina.
Absolutely. So as you can imagine, I think before we dive into what are the challenges, I do want to just mention that there's a lot of noise in this ecosystem. How many of you here use Gen AI, frontier models, foundation models, large language models all interchangeably? I'm telling you, it's pretty much everyone, and we see this a lot in policy ecosystem. But I think one of the core things that with these large language models that I just want to underscore is, because they're trained on massive corpuses of data, and they're capable of doing multitude of tasks down the stream, I think that is the power of these systems. And so when you start thinking about some of the top of mind risks for the enterprises that we are working with, everything from lack of situational awareness. Context is a big problem in large language models. Just based on the prompt or the pre-training of these systems, they have limited context, which is used for reasoning, but they don't have a very large contextual window, which many, I would say, providers are working towards. So I think really understanding context is one of the big issues we are seeing. The second issue we are seeing is validating the outputs, commonly known as hallucinations or confabulations. When you have this really smart system that is trained on massive amounts of data, it can't get everything right, but it can pretend to get everything right most of the times, right? So these confabulations and hallucinations are a big problem, and this is an active area of work that I'm actually really excited to see Microsoft, OpenAI work on, especially through techniques like grounding. And then very quickly, I would say that toxicity and bias is still a massive issue. And it takes on a very monumental scale when we start thinking about misinformation and disinformation because of these large systems. And then lastly, security. Adversarial attacks. We are seeing this especially in our government clients as they're using foundation models more excessively. Adversarial surface area has increased. So how do you bring in security parameters to put guardrails is really critical.
So are you seeing some concerns from companies about using anything at all from any off-the-shelf models at all?
All these. Yeah, I would say all these. And if you're interested, just about a month and a half back, Credo AI launched risk profiles on the top 7 foundation and generative AI models, including GitHub Copilot, Anthropic's Cloud, and now Cloud 2, Midjourney. You can go and check those out on our website because I think risk assessment of these third-party vendors is really critical.
And David, this resonates with yourself as well, because I know that you, GitLab recently partnered with Google on customizable foundation models. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of take a step back to the beginning of the question a minute ago, so when we started looking at how to apply AI to help developers, security professionals be more effective at what they're doing, we had to ask ourselves, why do people come to GitLab today? And then we wanted to meet that for AI. And so for us, it really became about making sure we're supporting everyone in the software development lifecycle. We also wanted to make sure we were privacy first and transparent about what we're doing. And we wanted to choose the right model for the right use case.
Sure.
And as part of our partnership with Google, we realized that they could provide us the model, the foundation model, and we could do the additional training we needed to do to get to where we wanted to be. And for us, we use around 16 models to make our product work today. They're a combination of in-house created models, open source models, and then commercial models, including Claude 2 as part of what we were doing. And the reason for that is we realized if you do what Navarina just mentioned and you find a use case and you go, well, every use case is the same, I'm going to use a really large LLM, you're going to end up with confabulations, which I'm glad you said confabulation because that's my favorite way to refer to it now. And so we now have a model specific to each use case, so we get better results, less confabulations, and closer to what our customers are looking for. In the case of GitLab, we're trusted by more than 50% of the Fortune 100 to secure their intellectual property, and AI can't be different from that. We need to make sure we're not using their software to train our models, and we're giving them recommendations based off of things that are trained on, say, permissive licenses, trained on specific use cases that they're trying to accomplish. And that allows us to get better results and reduce that risk. And I'm going to check out the paper you just mentioned, because I'm actually curious to see how it compares to what our team has been doing research-wise.
In terms of a smaller company wanting to customize foundation models in partnership with Google, is it something anyone can do? Or is there obstacles for them? Is it cost prohibitive?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of probably all 3 of those.
Okay.
So when you're doing the additional training on top of the foundational model, you end up using GPU time, you're going to be needing large data sets. All those things could cost a lot of money depending on the organization and what you're trying to do. What I always tell people is find the right model, even if that's a smaller model. You can do a lot more with that than maybe you would be able to do if you had to get a lot of training data to train a larger model.
Okay.
As an example, our suggested reviewers feature doesn't even require GPUs to be trained, deployed, and run, because it's built for a very specific thin purpose, and we're able to get the right amount of data to train it. And I would suggest that to startups and companies that are looking at this.
Okay.
Don't assume you need to go grab GPT-4 off the shelf and try to use that. Maybe you don't need Palm 2, but maybe there's something else that is a little bit more narrow that it's going to let you do the training on top of the foundation model.
Yeah, what we typically recommend for other startups is it's very easy to start with GPT because it's just an API.
Sure.
So like there's no code to write, there's no training, there's no data to collect. In minutes, we can get quick prototypes up and running, but very quickly the cost compounds and then it doesn't really make sense to use such a big model, especially most of the use cases are not so general purpose in general, like we kind of know what we want the model to do, and so then transitioning in that regime of fine-tuning, finding the specific task, the data, and training the model specifically for that, not only solves some of the issues around privacy and transparency, but it also leads to much lower costs and faster inference times.
Okay, and what type of companies are wanting that you're working with, basically? So what type of companies are coming to you and saying, hey, we want to do this all ourselves in-house?
In general, it's usually companies that deal with customer data or like any sensitive data, so
Like
PII, like health data or insurance data, anything that has some private information that they really just can't have travel back in an API and come back in their system. It's just not an option. So they want to leverage the open source. They want to have custom in-house built models. And that's one of the big issue with the security. And especially one thing that is becoming more and more obvious with LLMs is that it's all about the data, and it's becoming a huge competitive advantage. So even in the future, if an organization gives all their data to another organization, they basically give up their secret sauce in their business. So people want to keep that data even more and more now that they understand how these models are trained.
So it's basically bring the data to the large language models rather than the other way around. Or, if I got
Or bring the model.
Yeah, that's the wrong way. Yeah, you know what I mean. I'd like to talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT for enterprise. Now, they've obviously launched a product. I think Google have done similar, enterprise-grade products to satisfy people's concerns about encryption and things like that. Are you still finding that companies are concerned about that? So, ChatGPT for enterprise, does that still cut it in a enterprise setting?
I think it still really depends on the data. There's no black or white answer to this question. And I really resonate with what you said around like having a mixture model and a switch. So if my use case is pretty generic and the data is public data found on the internet, why go invest the resources of training a model? I can use ChatGPT for enterprise in that case. And there's many other cases where it might be okay. But anytime we're looking at customer data and sensitive data, even if it's encrypted, there's a lot of organization where it just cannot pass their security requirements. And that's where they need either open source or custom built models for their use.
Okay, that sounds fair enough.
If I may just add something, I think it's important to think about AI maturity of the organization. So something that we are seeing, especially in startups and mid-level companies, is it's easier to use these open API versions of these large language models than trying to fine-tune and contextualize that within your application. Whereas the big, Fortune 500 companies not only have the right set of stakeholders, mechanisms to test out these systems. So I would say that it really depends upon the AI maturity as well of the organization. And what we are finding is because some of these mid-stage companies are able to use these open AI versions and aren't maybe as focusing as much on risk parameters, they're able to test and trial out much more faster than some of the other companies where they're like, nope, let's shut it down till we have all the answers. And I think this is where governance becomes critical in how you can create these sandboxes of generative AI applications, because so much of it is context dependent, and try within that sandbox before you unleash the power of a large language model or a foundation model within your organization.
And I guess that raises questions about building a prototype and building a sort of commercial grade product. So like, how different is that? Testing something on a few people internally, or launching it for millions of people. That must be a completely different process.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about it is, and I'll say that I've seen developers at our company, myself, you get that initial magic in a prototype where you go, oh wow, this is really cool. And then when you start to realize, well, now I need to productize that, how do I do that? And then you start to learn, well, your prompts in the chat, and you're talking about like ChatGPT or Claude, that wasn't super advanced. I got my answer, but how do I scale that? And then you start to realize it's a lot more to productize that and get it to a point where it actually will do what you want to do almost every time you're doing it. And if you kind of bring it back to like the concerns for enterprises for a moment, I think it really comes back down to their concerns around privacy. I like your comment about the maturity. It's a good way to look at it. But depending on where I've been in the world, talking to customers, you've got some who are like, I just need the efficiency. I don't care about the privacy. And then you've got areas, especially in Europe, where like if you tell them, oh, the first thing I'm going to do is suck in all of your intellectual property and train my model, they go, thanks, have a great day. There's a good coffee shop down the road, right? And so if you look at it from a maturity standpoint, and then you kind of map it into what's the enterprise doing, I think you can start to look at it as like risk levels. I wouldn't compare it to like the DEF CON scores. That's probably a little too extreme, right? But it's, hey, to your point, like is this just information in a document that is widely readable online? Maybe that's low risk for me and I don't care, and that's fine to use in training. I don't care about the privacy policy around it. If it's your healthcare data, it's your source code, it's the thing that makes you a unique industry, unique product, you may want to then bring that a lot closer and look at the privacy requirements and so forth. For me, I kind of compare this boom over the last, we'll say, year with the ChatGPT boom, as you called it. It reminds me a lot of the social media boom years ago, where it was, I don't want to have to pay for the application, I just want to go use it. And we essentially were signing over our privacy information to get access to that social media platform.
It's a trade-off that some people might take and others won't, yeah.
Yeah, and we're kind of at that point where people are starting to realize that with AI now too, is that I've been giving it all this information, but is that information now going to be used to help someone else out? And did I just provide intellectual property accidentally? Yeah. And so I really challenge organizations who are looking to adopt AI, especially enterprises, depending on the space they're in, to ask themselves those couple of questions before you just hop in and say, no, I want the efficiency, screw the consequences to my data, and take that moment to understand that as you're making those decisions.
Can I just underscore something? I think and especially for this audience, coolness does not mean that you are going to get the return on investment on the AI that you are bringing in. And I think especially for startups and founders who are thinking about leveraging some of these foundation models, really important to start thinking about the moat you're creating because of the dependency factors that we have. So I think as we are thinking about this Gen AI boom, what's becoming very clear, and yesterday McKinsey released a very interesting report on what is the reality of Gen AI space. I highly encourage all of you to read it, because I think the coolness is there, the productivity gains are there. I use some sort of like DALL-E or ChatGPT on daily basis, but does that mean it's going to get you the ROI for your business? Mm-hmm. Very different discussion. So I thank you for mentioning that. I think that's really important.
And we can't talk about the AI without talking about regulation as well, which, Navarina, I know that you're deeply involved in, and at the moment, Europe is perhaps leading the way on regulating AI. Are you able to sort of summarize the sort of things they're looking at the moment, and can they know at the moment what the things they should be regulating are?
Yeah, we are living through a very interesting moment in time. Fast and policy and regulations has never gone together, and this is the first time we are seeing speedy regulation and policy making happening. And I'm actually very excited about it, because I believe that in the past we've had a wrong narrative that regulations can stifle innovation.
Sure.
I think when you have something as powerful as foundation models, having those guardrails in place is really critical. With that, obviously, what kind of guardrails, and have we put in enough thought, and that's why this multi-stakeholder collaboration is really critical. I spend a lot of time advising the White House, as well as working with the European Commission and Canada and Singapore. And I would say that a couple of core things we are observing. One, it's not like will regulations happen, they are going to happen. Europe is going to be the first one with Europe's Artificial Intelligence Act, which is scheduled to pass in December. So any startups here looking to do business in Europe, I highly recommend learning about it, or you can reach out to Credo AI, and we are happy to share feedback on what that looks like for your systems. The second thing is, I think within United States, there's a big debate around federal versus state. I mean, just in California, I'm so excited about Governor Newsom just last week announcing the executive order on these foundation models, and we're going to see, similar to CCPA, the Privacy Act, yeah, more regulations on transparency and responsibility and safety of these systems start to show up. So I think in AI, I would say it's a slightly different story. And certainly we should learn our lessons from social media, which we totally effed up, is we can't do that with AI because the stakes are so high. Just to give you an example, GPT 3.5, just to train that system, was equivalent of 120 US households, the energy consumption by those 120 US households. When you start thinking about the climate implications of these foundation models, that's just scratching the surface. So the impact on the planet, impact to our society, with the upcoming election thinking about misinformation, disinformation, then at national security thinking about adversarial attacks, there's a lot at stake.
Yeah.
So regulations are going to happen. I think they need to be intentional and speedy. And that's where we, technologists, a lot of folks from this ecosystem are spending a lot of time with the policymakers.
So should companies today be thinking ahead 1 or 2 years to what's coming down the road? Like how can they address the regulations when they're not in place yet and they're building the applications today? I mean, can they do that at the moment?
I'm happy to take this. I think one of the core things is how do you build trust with your AI? At the end, that's what it's going to boil down to.
Sure.
And the only way you can build trust is because, whatever Ines and David said here is you need to be very transparent around where you're using these systems, how these systems have been used, how did you test these systems, who were the stakeholders who did the reviews, what were the values that you actually brought in to guide the testing, development, design, productionization, and monitoring of these systems. All those need to happen for us to really make sure that the trust builds over time with AI. Otherwise, most of the enterprises that exist today won't exist tomorrow.
Yeah, there's interesting. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
We're at a very interesting point in all of this, and I think really what it is, and I'll use your maturity term from earlier, you as an organization need to take a step back and ask yourself, what is the outcome I'm looking for? What's my risk profile? How do I build maturity in my organization, which could be identifying a first team in the organization to adopt it, as opposed to saying, hey, it's available here, everyone go use it. And once you get that success, then you can begin to replicate that for your organization. And I always lead with that privacy part first, asking yourself, what does it mean if I'm providing my own detail? What is the cost if I run it locally so I don't need to provide additional detail? Those are all the things that I think organizations need to think about to be future-proofed. What I will say is GitLab's in a very unique position. We use AI as part of our platform to help everyone deliver software more effectively and more securely, but we also provide services like model ops functionality to allow organizations, enterprises around the world to start building AI into their own products. And when you're doing that, you have to ask yourself the same questions, like, if I'm going to be building my own model, where am I storing it? How am I versioning it? How am I tracking for bias and all the things that can happen? Is my training data good enough? And if you're asking yourself those questions and you're finding the right partners to do that, I think you begin to de-risk and you end up having a little more future-proof in case regulations do go in. I have faith that it will happen eventually. Maybe I'm a little more skeptic. But I take, I guess it would be weird joy in this, but I don't remember the gentleman's name. He's a House of Representative person here in the United States. I think he's 72, went back to college to learn about AI so he can help write regulations for the US government.
Oh, wow.
And that's a sign of how urgent it is to make sure we're doing it and we're doing it responsibly and correctly, that we don't stifle innovation, but make sure people are safe using AI.
I was just going to add on what Navarina was saying about the multi-stakeholder. I think even from the scientific community, we still don't know the extent of the capabilities of their model, how to evaluate them properly. So it's continuously evolving, and I think the regulations that are set around should also evolve continuously. So for startups and companies, it's hard to know how they're going to be regulated in the upcoming years, and they just need to be flexible around some of these things. And I think also on the regulation side, it's important to differentiate whether the model is a general purpose model and just open text and it can really do anything it wants versus it's a constrained model used for a specific use case with guardrails on the output, where even if the model was predicting something completely toxic, etc., it's actually not surfaced to the user because of some post-processing of the output. And I think I'm hoping on the regulation side we'll be able to differentiate the two so that startups that are using a generative AI, but maybe it's more for tailored use case, don't have to do a full examination of the model and not be slowed down by the progress. I think there's trade-offs based on the application we're using it for and how open-ended it is.
And those are exactly the conversations happening right now in the policy circles. And that's why injecting the technologist viewpoint, but also understanding the policy viewpoint is really important because of how important context is to making sure that you're governing these systems without stifling innovation.
Yeah.
So I know that you sit in a committee, so you advise President Biden, don't you? So can you maybe give us a little, any stories from there? Do you sit with him personally? And in general, do you think that Washington get what they need to do here to regulate this?
So here I'm in the capacity of CEO and founder of Credo AI. I cannot talk about the work that we are doing. What I can talk about is, I would say that we need a little bit different mindset in policy making, where iterative policy making is something that we should be okay with. Similar to, I am an engineer, technologist, and we've always embraced experimentation and iteration, but somehow we are not as forgiving when it comes to policymakers. So I would say that this is the first time that I'm seeing the speed in policy making, but we also need to be okay with that it's not going to be perfect. Because what Ines said is so important. We don't understand where these amazing, powerful systems are going to be used, and without understanding the point of use, it's very difficult to put guardrails around it.
Sure.
Having said that, when you think about especially the vendors who have the capacity, capital, compute to build these large language models, everyone from Anthropic to OpenAIs of the world, absolutely we should be asking them for more disclosures around how these systems are built. We should be thinking about a combination of both proprietary and open source, because both have pros and cons in certain spaces. And then lastly, I think there's a huge amount of responsibility as these foundation models are used down the stream to really embed transparency throughout so you can build that trust.
Well, just before we finish today, I'd like to go through each of you and ask you for one piece of advice for any company that's integrating generative AI into their software today. So Ines, if there's one piece of advice you could give.
I'd say put it in the hands of users as soon as possible. There's the model piece, but there's also the workflow and embedding, and there's so much to learn from how people interact with these models that putting it in the hands of users as fast as possible and getting that feedback is very helpful.
Okay, and David?
So I might be beating the drum on this a little too much, but privacy and security and how you're using it. The big challenge I've seen is people want to quickly jump and adopt, but then they end up in a situation where they've not through the consequences of those decisions, whether that is, and your comment about APIs work, like, is it secure in a way that that data will not be accessible by anyone else other than the person who's supposed to access it? And what am I having to do to train it? Where is it hosted? And how do I move forward? So it's usually the advice I give is think through the privacy and the security implications first, and then work about the use case second.
So be quick, but not too quick. Yeah. And
yeah, I think just to build on that, I think moving fast but with intention, that means shifting governance left. The advice that I have for you all to succeed is really thinking through the implication of governance at each and every step so that you can build trust with these very powerful systems is going to be really critical.
well, there was some great advice and discussion there. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.